The IED detonated at 0614 hours, and the world became fire. The lead truck folded like paper. Beck felt the pressure wave before she heard it, heat slamming through the doors, rattling her teeth, collapsing her lungs. Smoke poured black across the road. Someone was screaming. Her laptop was still open. The classified file had auto-decrypted 20 seconds ago. 3 lines. She read them twice. Operation Hollow Crown. Asset elimination approved. Unit designation Expendable. Through the cracked windshield she saw the drone, hovering in a fixed orbit, precise, patient. It wasn't enemy. Static crackled. Griff's voice cut through the smoke. Beck. A pause. We've been sold. Then nothing. Just the burning. The desert came alive before the sun did. That was the thing nobody told you about Syria in summer. The heat didn't wait for daylight. It seeped up from the ground at 0400, carrying with it the smell of scorched rock and old diesel, and something else, something chemical and wrong that Beck had never been able to name in 14 months of deployment. She'd stopped trying. She sat at her workstation inside FOB Kestrel's intelligence cell, a repurposed storage container with 3 monitors, 2 fans that didn't work, and 1 that did. The air conditioning unit had been broken for 11 days. Maintenance had submitted the request. Someone in logistics had approved it. Nobody had shown up. Beck had stopped caring about that too. The drone feed on her left monitor showed Sector 7, a 6-kilometer stretch of industrial wasteland northeast of Al-Tabqa. Abandoned processing plants, rusted warehouses, roads that hadn't seen civilian traffic in 3 years. The feed was crisp, 4K resolution, real-time. She could see individual rocks. What she couldn't see was anything that justified the mission brief sitting open on her right monitor. She read it again. Objective: locate and facilitate apprehension of HVT designated Iron Shepherd. Intelligence assessment: high confidence. Threat level: moderate, high confidence. She'd been in intelligence long enough to know what that phrase actually meant. It meant somebody up the chain had made a decision and needed the paperwork to support it. It didn't mean the intelligence was solid. It meant the conclusion was already written. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She drank it anyway. You've been staring at that same block of text for 20 minutes. Master Sergeant Daniel Griffin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with a particular expression he reserved for situations he'd already assessed and found wanting. He was a big man, 6'2", built like someone had assembled him from spare parts and then left him out in too many weathers. His face was a map of places most people never went. 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan, now Syria, which he referred to as the sequel nobody asked for. The grid coordinates changed, Beck said. I know. They changed at 2,200 last night. The mission brief was already distributed at 1800. I know that too. She turned in her chair. That's a 4-hour window where we were operating on coordinates that were officially superseded. Nobody flagged it. Nobody sent an update. The brief just changed, like it was always that way. Griff walked to the coffee station, poured himself a cup, looked at it, set it down. Beck, intel doesn't bleed. We do. He picked up the cup again. What changed in the coordinates? The extraction point moved 2 kilometers east. Into open ground? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Could be a routing update, traffic assessment, secondary threat avoidance. Could be, but you don't think so. Beck turned back to her monitors. On the drone feed, the industrial sector was still empty, still silent, still wrong in a way she couldn't articulate yet. I think someone decided something, and the mission brief was adjusted to reflect that decision rather than the intelligence. I think those are 2 different things. Griff drank his coffee, set the cup down. Brief in 40 minutes, he said. Be sharp. He left. Beck looked at the empty sector on her screen. The sun came up. The heat got worse. Fob Kestrel had been operational for 8 months and already looked like it had been abandoned for 3 years. That was the nature of forward operating bases in contested territory. They were built to be temporary, and they looked it. Prefab structures anchored with sandbags, concertina wires strung at irregular intervals, a motor pool that held 6 vehicles, 4 of which were consistently operational, a medical bay staffed by 1 PA and 1 medic who had learned more field surgery in 8 months than most trauma surgeons learned in residency. Beck walked the compound perimeter at 0530, as she did every morning, not for exercise, for pattern recognition. You learned a base by walking it. You learned its rhythms, its pressure points, its silences. You learned which silences were normal and which ones meant something. This morning's silence felt normal. That was almost the problem. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should, and Beck had learned to distrust exactly as it should in the same way she distrusted high-confidence intelligence assessments. She passed the motor pool. Specialist Torres was running pre-op checks on the 2 Humvees designated for today's mission, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who took mechanical reliability personally. He was 23, from Tucson, and had told Beck on her 3rd day at Kestrel that he planned to open a garage when he got home. He talked about it the way some people talked about their kids, with a kind of protective tenderness. "Morning, Captain." "Torres, how are we looking?" "Solid. Both vehicles are green. I'm pulling the fluid levels on the secondary as a precaution." "You always do that." "Yes, ma'am." He said it without apology. Beck continued her loop. At the eastern perimeter, she stopped and looked out toward Sector 7. From here, with the naked eyes, she could see nothing, just the brown-gray expanse of desert, heat already beginning to shimmer above the ground at this hour. The industrial structures were too far to make out, but she knew they were there. She pulled out her notebook, actual paper, actual pen, habit she'd maintained since her first deployment, because paper didn't crash and paper didn't get hacked, and wrote, "Grid Delta, Extraction East." Why East? She stared at it for a moment. Then she wrote, "Who benefits from East?" She didn't have an answer yet, but she had learned that the right question, asked early enough, was worth more than any amount of intelligence assessment. She went to the brief. The mission brief was conducted by Captain Marcus Webb, the unit's operations officer, in the FOB's command center. Another repurposed container, this one with a projection screen and a topographic display that showed Sector 7 in reassuring detail. Webb was 34, competent, pressed even in the desert, and possessed of the kind of absolute confidence in received information that Beck had once envied and now found quietly terrifying. He'd been in country for 5 months. He had never, to her knowledge, questioned a brief. "Today's objective is straightforward," Webb said, clicking through the slides with the brisk efficiency of someone who believed in the word straightforward. "HVT Iron Shepherd. Confirmed identification, Ahmad Khalil Nasir, militia commander, IED network facilitator. Intel puts him at this location." He pointed to a building in the industrial sector. "Between 0730 and 1100 today. Window is solid. We insert by vehicle, establish a perimeter. SF element moves in for the grab. Beck's team handles on-site document exploitation. We are wheels up at 700. Beck waited until he finished. "The extraction point." Webb looked at her. "What about it?" "It moved last night. From here," she pointed to the original grid, "to here." She moved her finger 2 kilometers east. "I'd like to understand the reasoning." Routing update. There was secondary reporting on the original extraction point. Possible IED threat on the access road. "When did that reporting come in?" A pause. Brief, but there. "Late yesterday." "Through what channel?" Webb's expression shifted. Not quite impatience, not quite something else. Beck, we have a 0700 departure. Is there a specific actionable concern, or is this a general process question? The other men in the room were watching. Griff was leaning against the far wall, face neutral, watching her in a way that was entirely different from watching Webb. Beck looked at the map. The new extraction point sat in open ground, no cover, no concealment, accessible from multiple approach angles. For an extraction under fire, it was tactically inferior to the original point in every measurable way. She could say that. She could lay out the assessment precisely and clearly, and it would be entered into the record, and Webb would say, "Noted," and the mission would proceed. "No specific actionable concern," she said instead. "I'll flag it in my post-op." Griff's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. They moved out at 0703. 2 Humvees, 8 personnel. Griff rode in the lead vehicle with the SF element. Staff Sergeant Cole Martinez, a compact and unnervingly calm man from San Antonio who communicated primarily in monosyllables, and 2 other operators whose names Beck had learned, but who were functionally interchangeable in the way that very good soldiers sometimes were. Beck rode in the second vehicle with Torres at the wheel, Specialist Yolanda Reyes on the gun, and a signals tech named Paulson, who was 26 and had been in country for 11 days. 11 days. Beck had not been consulted on that staffing decision. The drive to Sector 7 took 41 minutes. The road was unpaved for the last 18, and the heat coming off the desert floor turned the air outside the vehicles into something that shimmered and distorted, like looking through bad glass. Beck kept her laptop open on her knees, running a continuous feed from the overhead drone. Their drone, call sign Kestrel 6, orbiting at 12,000 feet. The sector looked empty. It had looked empty for 3 days of pre-mission surveillance. "You're running the feed hot," Paulson said. He was watching her screen. "Standard protocol is monitor only until contact." "I know the protocol." "Just saying, Captain." "Thank you, Paulson." She kept the feed hot. 12 minutes out, Griff's voice came over the internal net. "Kestrel 2, Kestrel 1. How's your read?" "Clear on approach," Beck said. "Drone shows nothing." "Copy." A pause. "Beck." "Yeah?" "You said nothing. Not all clear. Note the difference." She noted it. She went back to her screen. The industrial sector materialized out of the heat haze. A cluster of low concrete structures, rusted silos, a collapsed warehouse roof that had created a debris field across the northern access road. Webb's routing had them coming in from the south, which was the tactically cleaner approach on paper. On paper. Torres slowed as they entered the perimeter. The structures created a canyon effect. Walls on both sides, a natural choke point. Beck's fingers moved to her keyboard. "Eyes up," Griff said over the net. "We're in the funnel." Beck pulled up the building schematics. Nasser's supposed location was the second structure on the left, a former hydraulic parts manufacturer, 2 stories, multiple entry points. Good structure to defend. She noted that too. The vehicle stopped. Doors opened. The heat hit her like a physical object. She stepped out of the Humvee and immediately cataloged what she could see. 3 visible entry points on the target structure, 2 compromised, debris obstruction left side, damaged stairwell visible through east-facing window. Martinez was already moving his element toward the primary entry. Griff positioned himself at the vehicle with line of sight to the structure's roof. Everything was quiet. That was when Beck noticed the second drone. It was at altitude, much higher than Kestrel 6. She caught it only because she happened to be looking at the right angle of sky, and even then it was barely visible, a dark, geometric shape against the blue-white glare. She raised her hand to shade her eyes. "Griff, I see it. That's not ours." "No," Griff said, "it's not." He said it the way he said things he'd already decided about, flat, certain, without affect. Beck pulled out her handheld and pinged Kestrel 6's operator at the FOB. 3 seconds. Kestrel 6, Kestrel 2, confirm. Are we sharing airspace with any other asset today? The pause was 2 seconds too long. Kestrel 2, negative. You are solo asset. Why? Visual on unidentified drone, high altitude, bearing 270 from our position. Can Kestrel 6 get eyes? Another pause. We'll try to get a look. Stand by. Martinez's element had reached the primary entry. He looked back at Griff. Griff gave the signal. Hold. Martinez held, his expression asking a question without words. Beck was still watching the high drone. It wasn't moving. It was orbiting, she realized, the same slow circle, maintaining station directly above their position. Her laptop chirped. She looked down. The classified folder she'd been trying to access for 2 days, flagged for her access level but requiring secondary authorization she hadn't received, had unlocked. She didn't know why. She didn't know who had authorized it. The file was simply open, as if it had always been open, waiting. She opened it. The IED detonated at 0614 hours. No, not 0614. That was the hook. That was what was coming. In this moment, at this moment, she was reading a file, and the file contained 3 sections: an operational summary, a financial appendix, and a communications log. She read the operational summary first. Operation Hollow Crown. Authorized level, SAP. Objective, elimination of Iron Shepherd network and associated documentation. Secondary objective, destruction of material evidence linking Crystal Bridge contractors to unauthorized weapons transfers, Sector 7 facility. Unit tasked, FOB Kestrel SF element. Unit designation within Hollow Crown, Expendable. The last word had been typed by someone in a classified document about the men and women standing 20 meters away from her. Expendable. She read it 3 times. Then she read the financial appendix, a column of wire transfers, dates, account numbers in jurisdictions she recognized. Cayman Islands, Cyprus, a shell structure in Luxembourg. She didn't recognize the account names. She recognized 2 of the company names in the authorization chain. One was a defense contractor. One was an energy company with active concessions in northeastern Syria. Beck closed the laptop. She looked up. Martinez was still holding at the entry. Griff was looking at her. The high drone was still orbiting. "Griff," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "We need to abort. Give me a reason I can use on the radio. The mission objective doesn't exist. Nasser isn't here. We're not here to capture him." She kept her voice low, below the range of the other personnel. "We're here to destroy documentation in that building, and we are not supposed to survive the operation." Griff didn't move, didn't react. He looked at her for a long moment with those eyes that had seen too many things in too many countries, and she could see him running the calculation. Not whether she was right, she realized, whether the situation was recoverable. "How solid," he said. "SAP-level documentation. Wire transfers. The unit is listed by name in the operational order." He turned and looked at the building, then at the high drone, then back at her. "Martinez," he said into his radio, "hold at entry. Do not breach. Repeat, do not breach." Martinez's voice came back flat. "Copy, holding." Griff walked to Beck's position, slowly, as if they were discussing logistics. "Show me." She opened the laptop. He read in silence. His face showed nothing. When he finished, he straightened up, looked at the horizon for a moment, and said quietly, "That son of a bitch." "Webb?" "Webb's a lieutenant, not him." He looked at her. "What do you need?" "Time, and access to whatever's in that building before someone decides to clean up the variable." Griff keyed his radio. "All Kestrel elements, Kestrel 1. We have a potential secondary threat assessment on the target structure. Holding position, conducting perimeter evaluation. Break. Webb, you copy?" Webb's voice came back immediately. Copy, Kestrel 1, what's your timeline? 20 minutes. Possible IED threat on primary entry. We're being careful. A pause. Copy, 20 minutes, keep me advised. Griff lowered the radio. He looked at Beck. 18 minutes. Go. The building smelled like rust and old machine oil and something chemical that coated the back of the throat. Beck moved fast. Martinez and one operator, Kowalski, she'd finally sorted their names, covered her while she swept the ground floor. The structure was exactly what it appeared to be, an abandoned industrial facility, stripped of most equipment, concrete floor stained with decades of hydraulic fluid and coolant. Storage racks along the north wall, a stairwell in the southwest corner leading to the upper floor, and along the east wall, behind a false partition that had been installed recently, the concrete anchors were still clean, no dust accumulation, a server rack. 4 units, active indicator lights, running on a small generator tucked behind the partition, diesel-powered, sound-dampened with what looked like civilian acoustic foam. Someone was running active infrastructure in an abandoned building. Martinez, Beck said, cover that stairwell. She pulled a cable from her kit and connected directly to the primary server unit. Her laptop came up with a directory structure that made her chest tighten. Not because it was encrypted. It wasn't. It was open, organized, apparently unconcerned with discovery. That was the problem. People who were hiding something encrypted it. People who weren't hiding something because they controlled the environment, because they had surveillance and armed units and a classified operation designed to eliminate anyone who came looking. Those people didn't bother. She started pulling files. The directory had 4 main folders: logistics, personnel, financials, and communications. She pulled financials first. She already had context from the operational document, and corroborating financial data would create a chain of evidence that was harder to dismiss. Wire transfers going back 14 months, 43 transactions. The receiving accounts were the same structures she'd seen in Hollow Crown's appendix. Then communications, emails, most of them internal, using what appeared to be a proprietary encrypted platform. She couldn't read the encryption in real time, but she could pull the raw files and deal with them later. She started the transfer. 12 minutes, Griff said from the entry. I need 8. You have 6. She kept pulling. The personnel folder opened to a list of names she didn't recognize. Local nationals, she guessed, based on the naming conventions. Handlers, probably. Middlemen. And at the bottom of the list, in a separate subfolder titled US_coordination. 3 names she did recognize. She stared at the screen for 2 seconds. Then she photographed it with her phone, copied the folder, and moved on. Beck. I know. 4 minutes. She pulled the logistics folder last, scanning for anything that indicated the physical location of the weapons transfers referenced in Hollow Crown. She found it in a subfolder labeled with dates, manifests, vehicle registration numbers, routing through a Turkish border crossing she recognized as a known transit point for gray market equipment. Transfer complete. She disconnected the cable. Done, she said. Let's go. Martinez was already backing toward the entry when the first shot came through the east-facing window. The round hit the storage rack 2 feet above Martinez's head and filled the room with the sound of shearing metal. Contact east! Martinez was moving before the echo died, falling back, putting the server rack between himself and the window. Kowalski was already down on one knee by the entry, weapon up. Beck grabbed her laptop and moved. Training made it automatic, low, fast, toward cover, toward the exit, in that order. A second round came through the window. Then a third. Controlled fire, not suppression. Someone was shooting at specific targets. Sniper, Griff said over the radio, his voice perfectly flat. Single shooter, elevated position. East structure, second floor. Martinez, get your people out. They came out fast. Beck hit the sunlight and immediately went left, behind the Humvee's engine block. Torres was already there, weapon up over the hood. Reyes had her vehicle's gun oriented east, but couldn't engage without a clear line. From the second vehicle, Paulson was trying to raise Webb on the radio. Beck looked at the eastern structure, a taller building partially collapsed, the kind of elevated ruin that a confident sniper would pick without hesitation. Third floor window. She looked at the angle and the shot pattern and the spacing of the rounds. "He's not trying to kill us," she said. Griff had come out behind Martinez and was now crouched beside her. "Say again?" "3 shots. Clean angles. Martinez is good. Kowalski is better. If he wanted either of them, they'd be down." She kept her eyes on the east building. "He's moving us, pushing us toward the southern road, toward the extraction point, the new extraction point, the one 2 kilometers east in open ground." "Paulson," Griff said, "any luck?" "Radio's degraded," Paulson called back. "I'm getting carrier but no voice traffic. Interference. Try SATCOM." "SATCOM is down completely." Griff and Beck looked at each other. The communication blackout was not a coincidence. Nothing today was a coincidence. "They're hurting us," Beck said. "I know." Griff turned and scanned the perimeter, the structures, the open ground to the south, the high drone still orbiting overhead. "Torres, can you get us north?" Torres had his head out the window. "North Road has debris from the collapsed roof. I can get through it, but not fast." "Fast enough?" Torres looked at the road. "Maybe." Griff made the decision in less than a second. "Load up. We go north. Beck, keep that laptop live. I want Kestrel 6 on that east structure. I want eyes on whatever's waiting for us on that southern road. And I want someone to tell me who authorized that high drone." "On it." The sniper fired twice more as they loaded, both rounds into the ground near the vehicles. Final encouragement toward the southern route. Beck ignored them, got in the Humvee, pulled up the drone feed. What she saw on the southern road stopped her breath for a moment. 3 vehicles, parked, waiting. Military pattern, but not U.S. Armed, technical trucks, the kind used by exactly the kind of militia that Operation Hollow Crown was supposedly targeting. Except they weren't there to fight. They were there to finish the job that the operation had started. "Griff," she said, "south is a kill zone." "Figured." He was already in the lead vehicle. "Torres, go north, now." The Humvees lurched forward over the debris field. Beck held her laptop with one hand and her weapon with the other, watching the drone feed, watching the southern vehicles begin to move now that their quarry had been herded and lost, watching the high drone bank slightly in its orbit as if adjusting to track them. She opened a new window on her laptop and began composing a message, not to Webb, not to anyone at Kestrel, to a frequency she wasn't supposed to have. She didn't send it yet, but she started writing. "Griff," she said over the net, "go." "What did you say to me this morning?" "Intel doesn't bleed." A pause. "We do." "Yeah." She looked at the screen, at the names she'd photographed in the personnel folder, at the wire transfers, at the operational order that described her unit as expendable. "I think I understand that now." The Humvee hit open ground. The heat closed around them like a fist. Behind them, the building with its server rack and its false partition and its 14 months of transactions was still standing. For now. The notebook went back in her pocket. Beck stood at the eastern perimeter for another 30 seconds, doing nothing except watching the desert. This was something Griff had taught her. Not formally, not in any brief or debrief, but by example, the way most things worth knowing got transmitted in the military. You stood still and you looked. Not for anything specific, just looked. Let the picture compose itself. The desert didn't give her anything she didn't already have, but the act of looking settled something in her chest, made the question she'd written in the notebook feel less like paranoia and more like professional observation. She had been in military intelligence for 4 years. Before that, ROTC at University of Virginia, where she'd majored in political science and minored in Arabic under a professor who told her on her first day that the most dangerous phrase in geopolitics was, "It seemed like a good idea at the time." She'd written her senior thesis on intelligence failures, not the dramatic ones, not the famous ones, but the structural ones, the ones that happened not because people were evil, but because the system was designed to reward confidence over accuracy. Her thesis advisor had given her an A and told her she'd have a hard time in uniform. He wasn't wrong. She'd had a hard time in uniform. Not because she was difficult, she was demonstrably very good at her job, but because she asked questions that made people uncomfortable. And she kept asking them even after she'd been asking to stop asking them. And she had a habit of being right at inconvenient moments. She'd been attached to FOB Kestrel specifically, she suspected, because her previous assignment had ended with an intelligence assessment that contradicted three senior officers' preferred narrative and turned out to be correct 2 weeks later, after the operation it was supposed to support had been conducted on bad assumptions and produced bad results. Nobody had thanked her. She'd been reassigned within the month. Syria was her reassignment. She turned away from the desert and walked toward the command center. The morning was heating up fast. By 0900, it would be over 100. By noon, it would be 115. And the afternoon would be the kind of heat that made thought itself feel effortful. She needed to think now, while thinking was still possible. The FOB was coming alive around her. Cook fires in the mess tent. A mechanic she didn't know working on something in the motor pool with a sound like tearing aluminum. Reyes doing weapons maintenance outside the second barracks, disassembling and reassembling with the meditative focus Beck had noticed in the best soldiers, the ones who treated equipment care not as a task, but as a practice. "Captain," Reyes didn't look up. "Heard we're going into Sector 7. "Correct. That place gives me a feeling." Beck stopped. "What kind of feeling?" Reyes considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. She was 25, from El Paso, had done a previous tour in Afghanistan before this assignment. She wasn't prone to statements she couldn't support. "Like something's been set up," she said finally. "Like the stage is too clean, you know? Nothing's happened out there in months, and now all of a sudden there's a high-confidence HVT? That's a reasonable observation." Reyes resumed her assembly. "Not asking you to do anything with it, just saying." Beck filed it alongside her own reasonable observations and went to the brief. The northern road held for exactly 400 meters. Then Torres hit the debris field. Not the collapsed roof section they'd expected, but something new, something that hadn't been there on the pre-mission drone survey. A deliberate obstruction. Concrete blocks, heavy gauge, arranged in a pattern that blocked both lanes and the shoulders. Not rubble, not collapse. Placed. "Stop," Griff said. Torres stopped. The engine ticked in the heat. Griff got out slowly, walked to the obstruction, crouched, ran his hand along the concrete edge. He stood up and looked back at Beck through the windshield. His expression said what he wasn't going to say over the radio. Someone had done this before they arrived. Beck pulled up the drone feed. Kestrel 6 was still on station, orbiting, giving her a clean overhead view of the sector. The obstruction hadn't been visible on the feed because it was tucked under the shadow of a corrugated metal overhang, placed there specifically to avoid aerial detection. She switched to the thermal overlay and looked at the surrounding terrain. The southern kill zone was in motion. The three technical trucks she'd spotted earlier were moving north now, flanking, unhurried in the way that things move when they know their target has nowhere to go. "Griff," she said over the radio, "South element is moving. 3 vehicles heading north. They have us bracketed." "West route?" She checked. "Dead end. Industrial complex. No through road." "East?" "Opens into flat ground. No cover for 2 kilometers. That high drone will track us the entire approach." Griff came back to the vehicle. He got in, closed the door, sat for a moment with his hands on his knees, looking at the obstruction. Beck had seen that posture before. In 2 years working alongside special operations personnel, it was the posture of a man running through options and not liking any of them. "What's our play?" Martinez said from the lead vehicle. Griff keyed his radio. "Webb, Kestrel 1. Silence. "Webb, Kestrel 1, do you copy?" More silence, and then, "Not Webb." A different voice. One Beck didn't recognize. Calm, administrative, the voice of someone conducting a process rather than a conversation. "Kestrel Elements, this is Foxtrot Actual. Be advised your mission tasking has been updated. Proceed to extraction point Echo 7 for immediate dust-off. Acknowledge." Echo 7 was the new extraction point, the one in the open ground 2 kilometers south, the kill zone. "Foxtrot Actual," Griff said. "Identify yourself. Proceed to Echo 7, Kestrel 1. Acknowledge." "Foxtrot Actual, I have a road obstruction at grid. Kestrel 1, your current position is non-compliant with mission routing. Proceed to Echo 7 immediately. This is a direct order." Griff looked at Beck. Beck looked at the drone feed. The southern vehicles were still moving north. At their current pace, they'd reach the industrial sector in 11 minutes. "Acknowledged," Griff said into the radio. Then he clicked off. "We are not going to Echo 7. "They'll know we didn't comply," Martinez said. "They already know everything we're doing. Has been that way since 0600. Griff turned to Torres. "Can you go around? Through the facility yard?" Torres studied the terrain. "The surface is compressed earth. Might hold. Might not. Might. Yes, Sergeant Major. Go." The Humvee lurched off-road into the facility yard. Packed earth, surface cracked from heat but solid enough, tires finding purchase. The second vehicle followed. They moved parallel to the obstruction, gave it 50 meters clearance, and came back to the northern road beyond the debris field. Ahead was open desert, flat, exposed, no terrain features. "Where are we going?" Paulson asked. He sounded young. He was young. 11 days. "Away from where they want us," Griff said. "That's all we know right now." It wasn't enough. Beck knew it wasn't enough, but she also knew that Griff was buying time, and time was what she needed, because the message she'd started composing on her laptop was almost finished, and the person she was sending it to was the only play they had left. She kept typing. The supply convoy was supposed to reach them at 1100. At 10:45, Beck got a one-line message through a narrow bandwidth channel that Paulson was still managing to hold open. "Convoy rerouted. Security threat on approach. ETA unknown." She read it to Griff. "Translated," he said, "that means the convoy isn't coming." That's my read. They had stopped in a shallow depression 3 kilometers north of the industrial sector. Not cover exactly, but the best available terrain feature, a natural fold in the ground that reduced their profile from the east. The vehicles were positioned nose out, engines idling to keep the air conditioning running for the equipment. In this heat, electronics failed without cooling. Beck's laptop was already running hot, the fan working at maximum, the chassis warm against her thighs. Griff had the team in a loose perimeter, Martinez and Kowalski on the north and east, Torres on the vehicles, Reyes on the gun. The other 2 operators, Wash and Delgado, she'd finally committed both names to memory, covered south. Paulson was managing communications with the focus of someone who understood that the radio was the lifeline and the lifeline was fraying. Griff sat beside Beck in the partial shade of the second Humvee's door. "How good is your contact?" he said quietly. "I've never used this channel directly. It's a journalist, Sarah Kwan. She's done 3 embeds. She has Pentagon contacts, and she has a record of..." Beck paused. "She publishes what she gets, no filtering." "That's the point." "Yes. The chain of command is going to call it a leak." The chain of command listed us as expendable in a classified operational order. I'm comfortable with their characterization. Griff made a sound that was almost a laugh. You always this calm? No. She looked at her screen. I'm terrified. I'm just good at the other thing. He nodded. This seemed to satisfy him in a way that reassurance wouldn't have. Beck went back to her message. She was being careful. Not about what she included. She'd already decided to include everything, but about the structure. A journalist received information constantly, and information without context was noise. She was building context. The financial transfers first, because money created a paper trail that was harder to dispute than narrative. Then the operational order, because Hollow Crown's language was specific and damning and had clearly been written by someone who never expected it to be read by anyone outside the authorization chain. Then the personnel list from the building server, the names she recognized with their affiliations and their dates. Then her own account, third person, factual, time-stamped. Beck, Martinez's voice on the radio, very quiet. We have movement, south, 400 meters. She looked up. Through the heat shimmer, shapes were resolving. Vehicles, moving slowly, searching pattern. The southern element had found the northern road and followed it. Weapons free? Martinez asked. Griff looked at Beck for 1 second. Then, negative, hold fire. We do not engage unless fired upon. We are not the aggressors in this situation. Copy. The vehicles moved across their southern horizon, sweeping, quartering the ground. They hadn't spotted the depression yet. Beck counted her heartbeats and kept typing. The vehicles passed, continued east, didn't stop. They'll be back, Griff said. I know. She hit send. The message went out at 10:57. She had no way of knowing if it arrived. She had no way of knowing if Quan would understand what she was sending or act on it fast enough to matter. She had no way of knowing anything except what she could see, which was a shallow depression in Syrian desert, 8 people, 2 vehicles, and a high drone overhead that had been tracking them without deviation for 3 hours. Okay, she said. It's sent. Good. Griff stood up. Now we survived long enough for it to matter. At 11:30, Griff tried to raise Webb again. This time Webb answered. His voice was different, careful in a way it hadn't been this morning, each word placed like a foot in uncertain terrain. Kestrel 1, I've been trying to reach you. Where are you? North of sector. We had a route obstruction and adjusted. Webb, who is Foxtrot Actual? A pause. That's a coordination element, joint task force level. Name. I don't have a name, Kestrel 1. They came in through a parallel channel. I've been trying to verify their authority through my chain of Webb. Griff kept his voice flat. Did you authorize the new extraction point? A longer pause. The update came from J2. I implemented it. Did you review the tactical assessment of Echo 7 before you implemented it? Kestrel 1, I understand there are concerns, but Marcus, first name, deliberate. Beck watched Griff's face. Something had shifted there, something careful and almost sad. Those trucks sitting on Echo 7 are not ours. You understand what I'm telling you? The silence that followed was the silence of a man having a realization he didn't want to have. Beck had seen that silence before too, in different contexts, in different people. The moment when the picture resolved into something that couldn't be unresolved. I didn't know, Webb said finally. His voice had changed again, smaller. I know you didn't. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to the FOB commander, right now, in person, and report what I just told you. Not over radio. In person. You understand? Yes. And Marcus, document everything. Timestamp it. Everything that came through that parallel channel. Every order, every update. Do it now before anyone tells you differently. Kestrel 1, are you? A pause. Are you going to be all right? Griff looked at Beck. She gave him nothing. Working on it, he said. Go, now. He clicked off. Martinez said from his position north. Movement again. Same vehicles, coming back west. They're quartering, Griff said. Systematic. They've got time. He looked at the sky. The high drone, still there, still patient. Somebody's watching everything we do and feeding it to those trucks. The drone is the problem, Beck said. Yeah. If we could break the drone's feed, we can't shoot it down. It's too high, and firing into the air in this environment is a good way to announce exactly where we are. Beck looked at the drone, then at her laptop. There might be another way. If I can identify the drone's operational frequency and inject noise into the signal, I can degrade its video quality to the point where real-time tracking becomes unreliable. I can't kill the feed, but I can make us harder to see. Can you do that? With Paulson's equipment and about 40 minutes, maybe. You have 30. She went to Paulson. He looked at what she needed and made a face that was not quite a no. This is not standard application of this equipment, he said. I know. If I blow the transmitter trying this, then we lose something we're barely using anyway. Paulson, those trucks are going to find us in about 20 minutes. I need you to make a decision. Paulson looked at the equipment, looked at her, looked at the trucks, barely visible on the horizon. He was 26 years old and 11 days into his first combat deployment. None of the decisions he was being asked to make today were in any training he'd received. Tell me what you need, he said. The drone's feed degraded at 12:14. Not killed, blurred, fragmented, the image breaking into artifacts every few seconds. Enough to make real-time tracking genuinely difficult. Beck watched the result on her own display, where Kestrel 6's operator had shared the high drone's apparent behavior pattern. It was now circling in a slightly wider arc, as if trying to reacquire a clear image. The southern vehicles had stopped, standing by probably, waiting for the feed to clear. That buys us time, Griff said. Not a solution. No. Request for evacuation. Beck had already drafted it, formal, through proper channels, citing the road obstruction and degraded communications as the justification. Not the full picture, enough to generate a paper trail. She sent it at 12:17. The denial came back at 12:31. Kestrel elements. Evacuation request denied. Security situation at FOB precludes asset allocation. Continue mission objectives and proceed to designated extraction. Command. Griff read it twice. His jaw was tight, a muscle working at the corner. Beck had seen that expression on him once before, when a resupply had been delayed 3 days on a previous op, and a decision had been made above his pay grade that cost someone unnecessarily. He hadn't said anything then either. He'd just gone quiet in a particular way. They denied evac, Martinez said over the radio. Copy. Griff's voice was controlled. Maintain positions. Sergeant Major, Wash's voice now, from the southern position. These guys know what's happening out here? Working on it. With respect, it doesn't feel like... I know what it feels like, Wash. Maintain your position. Silence on the net. Beck looked at Griff. I need to tell you something else. Say it. The personnel list from the building server. 3 U.S. names. She pulled up the photo on her phone. 2 are contractors. Defense Logistics. Both have active clearances. Both have been in country within the last 6 months. The third, she showed him the screen. He looked at the name, read it again. You're sure? He said. It wasn't a question. It was in a subfolder titled US_coordination. His name, his clearance number, and a set of dates corresponding to the wire transfers in the financial records. Griff set the phone down very carefully, the way you set something down when you're making a conscious effort not to throw it. He sat for a long moment with his hands on his thighs, looking at nothing. 22 years, he said quietly. Beck didn't answer. I've known him for 22 years. He stopped, started again. He was at my wedding. He was at my kid's christening. He's, he was in the same unit in Fallujah, 2004. We pulled each other out of. He stopped again. It doesn't matter. It does matter. It doesn't change anything. No, but it matters. Griff picked up the phone, looked at the name one more time, put it in his pocket. When he looked up, his face had settled into something Beck recognized as resolution. Not anger, not grief, though both were in there somewhere underneath. Just the flat, forward-looking expression of a man who had made a decision and closed the door behind it. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Right now? I need you to help me figure out how we get through the next 6 hours. And then? And then I need you to make sure what I'm carrying gets out of here." He nodded once. Done. At 1318, Private First Class Danny Okafor died. He was 21 years old, from Columbus, Ohio, and had been added to the mission roster as a last-minute replacement for a signals tech who'd reported sick the previous evening. Beck had met him twice, once at the brief, where he'd sat in the back and taken notes, and once at the vehicles, where he'd helped Torres run pre-op checks with the eagerness of someone who wanted to be useful. He was hit by a burst of automatic fire from the east while attempting to reach Paulson's position to relay a radio frequency update. The distance was 40 meters of open ground. It took 3 seconds. There was nothing anyone could have done. Beck heard the fire, heard Kowalski's voice on the net, "Man down, east contact," and was moving before the echo died. She reached Okafor before Martinez did. She knew immediately. The training was automatic and the knowledge was immediate, and she did what needed to be done, and then she sat back on her heels in the Syrian dust and looked at the sky for 3 full seconds. 21 years old, from Columbus, wanted to be useful. Griff arrived. He looked at Okafor. His face showed nothing that Beck could identify. She'd learned that this was not absence of emotion, but the opposite. Emotion so fully present that it had nowhere to go, so it went nowhere, and the face became still. "They've moved their position," he said. "East contact means they found the gap. They're repositioning." "I know." Beck stood up. Dust on her knees, dust everywhere. "We need to move." "I know." She looked at Okafor one more time. 21. Columbus. "Griff," she said. "Yeah. He was not supposed to be on this mission. He replaced someone who got sick. You understand what I'm saying?" Griff looked at her. Something shifted in his eyes. "The sick report might not have been, I don't know, maybe, but someone made a roster adjustment that put a kid with 11 days in country into this field, and that someone may have had reasons for it." Griff closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, opened them. "Later, we move." They moved. The eastern contact was 2 shooters, suppressive fire, designed to push them north. Beck recognized the same pushing tactic from the sniper in the industrial building. The same methodology, the same patience, the same destination implied by the direction of the pressure. They were being herded again. Always north, always away from the roads, always into more open ground where the drone, even with its degraded feed, could more easily maintain contact. She filed this observation alongside everything else she was carrying, and she kept moving. At 14:02, Griff had enough. He'd been patient. Beck had watched him be patient through the denied evacuation, through Okafor, through the repositioning contacts, through 2 more attempted radio calls that went to the same anonymous Foxtrot actual voice and produced no actionable information. He'd been patient in the way that experienced soldiers were patient, which was not the absence of urgency, but its compression, held under enormous controlled pressure. At 14:02, the radio crackled, and Foxtrot Actual came back with another directive to proceed to Echo 7. And Griff picked up the handset and said, very clearly and without any particular heat, "Identify yourself, full name and rank, or I will treat this channel as compromised and file accordingly." Silence. Identify yourself. More silence. This unit has had a KIA. We have denied evacuation, active contact from non-US forces, and a road obstruction that was placed before our arrival. I am formally documenting this communication and requesting immediate escalation to flag officer level. Respond. A long pause, then. Kestrel 1, this channel is, who are you? Not appropriate for, what is your name? Silence. The channel clicked off. Griff set the handset down. He looked at the team, Martinez, Kowalski, Reyes, Wash, Delgado, Torres, Paulson. 8 people, now 7, all of them watching him with the particular attention that soldiers give to the person they've decided to follow when the situation has moved beyond doctrine. Listen up, he said. Not loudly, he never spoke loudly. Here's what I know. We've been set up. The mission was designed to put us in a position where we could be eliminated by a third-party element, and the operation could be characterized as a firefight with insurgent forces. Someone in the chain of command is involved in this, and I don't know how high it goes. I do know that Captain Hayes has documentation that if it gets out, will be very damaging to certain people. Those people would prefer that it doesn't get out, along with all of us. Nobody spoke. That's the situation. You deserve to know it. He looked around the circle. You also deserve to know that I intend to get every one of you out of this. I don't know exactly how yet, but that is my intention, and I am going to work the problem until I find the answer. Any questions? Wash said, What do we do right now, Sergeant Major? Right now, Griff said, we find better ground and we give Beck time to do what she needs to do. Because right now she is our primary asset and that laptop is our best weapon. He looked at Beck. What do you need? Beck had been thinking about this for the last 20 minutes. I need to reach someone else, she said. I sent the initial package to Quan, but I don't know if it arrived or if she's acting on it. I need a second channel. Something that creates immediate pressure, not media pressure that takes too long, institutional pressure. Someone who can make a phone call in the next 2 hours that causes someone in DC to pick up. Who? She thought about the personnel list, the 3 names. Then she thought about the financial records and the specific contractors they implicated. And from there she followed the trail she'd been building since the industrial building, tracing the shape of the network. The contractor in the Crystal Bridge authorization chain, she said, the energy company, they have a Washington office, which means they have lobbyists, which means they are extremely sensitive to congressional attention. If I can get their specific financial exposure in front of the right congressional staffer, you know a congressional staffer. My uncle is the chief of staff for a senator on the Armed Services Committee. I haven't talked to him in 2 years. I have his personal cell number. She paused. He's going to be furious. Good, Griff said. Furious people make fast phone calls. He looked at Paulson. What do we need to get her a clean signal? Paulson, who had been listening to all of this with the expression of someone who had enrolled in a very different war than the one he was currently in, said, 20 minutes to reposition the antenna array, and we need to be stationary. Find us the best ground you can. 15 minutes. Move. They found a shallow ridgeline at 1430. Not much, barely a 2-meter rise above the surrounding terrain, but it gave them concealment on 3 sides and a line of sight east that Martinez could work with. Beck made the call at 1441. Her uncle picked up on the 3rd ring, which meant he was in his office and not in a meeting, which was the first piece of luck they'd had all day. She could hear him start to say something warm, her name, a greeting, and she cut across it immediately. Uncle David, I need you to listen to me very carefully and not ask any questions until I'm finished. Can you do that? A pause. He knew her well enough to hear something in her voice. Go ahead. She talked for 4 minutes. She was precise and she was fast, and she gave him the financial figures first because he was a political person, and political people understood money in a way that even experienced legislators sometimes didn't understand intelligence assessments. She gave him the contractor names, the energy company, the specific Syria concessions, the dollar amounts, the dates. Then she told him about Hollow Crown and the operational order and what it said about the unit she was currently sitting in the middle of. Then she told him that she had a dead soldier, a denied evacuation, and active pursuit by a non-U.S. armed element, and that she needed him to make a phone call in the next hour that would cause someone with sufficient authority to pick up a different phone. He was silent for a long moment. "Are you safe right now?" he said. "Right now? Yes. In 3 hours? I don't know." "Rebecca, Uncle David, the call." Another pause. "I'm going to need to verify. I'm going to send you the documentation package. You'll have it in 90 seconds. You don't need to verify it. You need to show it to someone who will be very motivated to take it seriously because their name isn't in it and they can make it someone else's problem if they move fast." She paused. "The Armed Services Committee has subpoena authority over defense contractors. I know you know that." A very long pause. She could hear him breathing, could imagine him sitting at his desk in the Russell Senate office building, looking at whatever was on his screen, doing the calculation she needed him to do. "This is going to be, if this is what you're saying it is, this is going to be very large, Rebecca." "Yes." "And you're in Syria right now, in the field?" "Yes." "All right." His voice had changed. She'd heard this voice before, at family dinners when he was talking about something he'd decided to do, regardless of the personal cost. A particular flatness, a kind of commitment. "Send the package. I'll make the call." "Thank you." She cut the connection and sent the package. Griff was watching her. "Done," she said. "Will it work?" "I don't know, but it creates a record that exists outside of military channels. That matters whether we get out or not." She looked at him. "I need to tell you what I'm going to do next." The order. She'd told him about the order 2 hours ago. The directive she'd received through the secure uplink, flagged as coming from Foxtrot Actual, ordering the destruction of all documentation in the industrial building. She hadn't told him the second part. "There's a second component," she said. "The order includes authorization for collateral clearance. The building has non-combatants. The server room that I pulled data from, there were indicators of occupancy on the upper floor. Thermal signatures on the pre-mission drone survey that were logged as inconclusive. I think that was deliberate logging. I think people knew." Griff went very still. "If we comply with the order," Beck said, "those people die, and all the documentation I pulled becomes moot because the building becomes a smoking hole, and the official account is that we destroyed an insurgent command node during a firefight, and everything in it was enemy material." She paused. "If we don't comply, we are in formal violation of a direct order from a senior command authority, and we are officially rogue." "We're already rogue," Griff said quietly. "Yes, but this makes it official. And it means whoever is running Hollow Crown will have the justification they need to escalate the response to us." Griff looked at the ground for a long moment. When he looked up, "You're going to break the order." "I'm going to broadcast the order," Beck said, "on open frequency, with the content intact, including the collateral clearance language." She met his eyes. "I'm not going to ask you to cover me for that. It's my decision." "Like hell it is," Griff said. "You broadcast, you expose our position. I need 30 seconds to position people before you do it." He stood up. "Martinez, listen up." The broadcast went out at 15:09 hours on emergency open frequency, the frequency monitored by all military elements in the theater, by air traffic control, by coalition partner units, and, under specific circumstances, by certain journalistic organizations that maintain military monitoring equipment. Beck's voice was steady. She read the order verbatim, the unit designation, the collateral clearance language, the authorization chain. Then she stated her name, rank, and position. Then she stated the name of the building and its grid coordinates and said that non-combatants were present and that she was formally refusing the order on the grounds that it constituted an unlawful command. It took 47 seconds. The frequency exploded. Not immediately. For 4 seconds after she finished, there was absolute silence. The silence of people across a wide geographic area processing what they had just heard. Then traffic, overlapping, voices coming in from multiple stations, some in English, some in Arabic, some in what sounded like French, a French coalition partner unit, she'd later learn, whose commanding officer had been waiting for exactly this kind of incident for reasons of his own. Foxtrot Actual came on the frequency almost immediately. Kestrel Element, you have just compromised a classified operation. You are ordered to cease transmission immediately and comply with standing directive. Failure to comply will result in... Griff keyed his own radio. This channel is now a matter of record. Every unit monitoring this frequency is a witness. Foxtrot Actual, identify yourself. Silence from Foxtrot Actual. Identify yourself, Griff said again, because in about 40 minutes there are going to be people in Washington who are very interested in who was giving orders in Syria today and whether those orders were lawful. And your transmission record is going to be the primary exhibit. So I'll ask you one more time, identify yourself. Foxtrot Actual went off the air. From their elevated position, Beck watched the southern vehicles. For a long moment, they didn't move. Then, one turned, moved away. Then the second. The third held for almost 30 seconds longer, as if someone was making a decision on the other end. Then it turned too. They're pulling back, Wash said. He sounded like he couldn't quite believe it. Someone made a phone call, Beck said. Griff looked at her. Your uncle. Maybe, or the broadcast itself, or Quan, or all three. She looked at the retreating vehicles. The thing about exposed networks is that everyone in them starts calculating their own exposure. The vehicles pull back because whoever is running them just realized that the operation is compromised and the risk calculus has changed. It's not over, Griff said. No, it's not over. Above them, the high drone was still orbiting, still patient, but its behavior had changed subtly. It was no longer tracking, no longer adjusting its circle. It was maintaining a fixed position, as if someone had stopped actively operating it and left it on automatic hold. 15 minutes later, it began moving west, away from them. Slowly, and then with increasing speed, like something that had been decided and was now executing. Beck watched it go. She thought about Okafor, and the gap, and the East contact, and the decision that had put him in that gap. She thought about the personnel list on the server, and the name that Griff had recognized, and the 22 years, and Fallujah in 2004. She thought about the convoy still somewhere on a Syrian road that wasn't coming, and the evac that had been denied, and the voice of the man who'd called himself Foxtrot Actual, so calm and administrative, so professionally unconcerned with the 8 people he was trying to manage into a kill zone. She thought about what she'd sent and whether it would be enough. Griff, she said. Yeah, Martinez. She looked at him across the position. All of you. She waited until she had all of them. What I sent is out there. What I broadcast is on record. None of that unhappens now, regardless of what they do next. She paused. That's not nothing. Wash said quietly. Okafor. Yes, Beck said. Okafor. Nobody spoke for a moment. All right, Griff said. His voice was the voice of a man returning to work. They pulled back, which means we have a window. I want to use it to consolidate position and get actual communication established with someone who can tell me what is happening above our heads. Paulson. On it, Paulson said. He was already moving to the equipment. Beck looked at her laptop. The battery was at 31%. She plugged it into the vehicle's auxiliary power and kept working. There was still part 3 to survive. The message from Sarah Kwan arrived at 15:44. It was brief. Package received. Verifying. Publishing window 6 hours. Stay alive. Beck read it 3 times. Then she passed the phone to Griff without comment. He read it, handed it back. 6 hours. Yes. We can do 6 hours. We can try. She looked at the horizon. The vehicles were gone. The drone was gone. The immediate pressure had eased into something that felt almost like calm, which she distrusted more than the pursuit, because calm in situations like this was almost always just the next problem, taking its time arriving. There's something I need to say. Griff waited. The broadcast, I didn't know what the reaction would be. I hoped for what happened, but I didn't know. In the 47 seconds between when I keyed the radio and when Martinez started receiving contact from the east, she stopped. Griff waited. Delgado took a round. I know. It wasn't a kill, but he took it because I broadcast our position. Beck, I'm not... She stopped again. I made a decision that had a consequence, and I need to sit with that. Griff looked at her for a long moment, not unkindly. There's a name for what you're doing right now. My chaplain in Afghanistan called it the accounting. Every decision in the field has a cost, and after the field, you account for the costs. He paused. The accounting matters, but you do it after. Right now, you did what needed to be done, and we are alive, and Delgado is alive, and whoever is running Hollow Crown is making very different phone calls than they were making 2 hours ago. He met her eyes. Hold the accounting, do it right. She nodded. Can you keep working? Yes. Then keep working. She kept working. The sun moved west, and the heat began its marginal, almost imperceptible decline that never quite became cool. And the frequency was quiet now, and Paulson had managed to establish a secure channel to FOB Kestrel that bypassed whatever the parallel command structure had been using. And Webb, she could hear Webb's voice on the channel, strained and careful and genuinely trying, had confirmed that the FOB commander had been briefed, that a formal incident report was being filed, that a congressional inquiry had apparently already been initiated from a Senate office in Washington. It was working, slowly and with costs that she would account for later, and with uncertainties that wouldn't resolve for weeks or months, or possibly years, but the mechanism was in motion, and mechanisms in motion were harder to stop than plans on paper. At 16:22, Martinez said, "Vehicle approaching from the north, single truck, moving slow." Beck looked up. Coalition markings? French. Looks like... A pause. They're flying a blue flag. They want to talk. Griff looked at Beck. The French unit that was monitoring the open frequency, she said, their CO. Yeah, Griff stood, dusted off his hands, a gesture that served no practical purpose and was entirely human. Good. He looked at the approaching vehicle. Let's go talk to someone who isn't trying to kill us. For the first time since 0614 hours, Beck almost smiled. They moved northeast for 20 minutes before finding ground that didn't feel like a trap. Beck ran triage on what she had while they moved. Laptop open on her knees, the jostling of the Humvee over unpaved ground making the cursor jump, compensating with pressure from her palm. The financial data was intact. The communications folder she'd pulled from the server was intact, though most of it remained encrypted and would need proper tools to open. The personnel photographs were intact. The operational order from Hollow Crown was intact. She kept coming back to the word, expendable. Not reckless endangerment, not acceptable risk, the euphemism she'd seen used in after-action reviews to paper over decisions that had cost lives. Expendable, a clinical word, a procurement word, the word you use for munitions and fuel and other consumables that were used up and replaced without ceremony. She was 34 pages into an intelligence career that had been built on the premise that accurate information correctly analyzed, could save lives. That was the theory. The theory was that intelligence existed to reduce uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty led to better decisions. And better decisions led to outcomes where fewer people ended up in Syrian desert being herded toward kill zones. Okafor had been 21. He'd taken notes at the brief. He'd helped Torres with the fluid levels. The Humvee hit a rock, and her cursor jumped, and she put her hand on the screen to steady it. "You okay?" Torres asked. He was watching the road and watching her in the mirrors simultaneously, the way good drivers in combat zones watched everything at once. "Fine." "Okay." He didn't press. That was the right call. She went back to work. The call with Webb had done something to Griff that Beck didn't fully process until afterward. She'd seen senior NCOs in difficult positions before, had watched them make the particular calculations that their rank required, balancing institutional loyalty against situational reality, the chain of command against what was actually in front of them. Most of the time, the chain won. It was designed to win. The entire architecture of military authority was built so that the chain would win, in the belief that individual judgment under pressure was less reliable than centralized command, which was usually true, and was catastrophically false when the command was compromised. Griff had been in uniform for 30 years. 30 years of letting the chain win, of trusting that the people above him, however imperfect, were working toward the same basic objectives he was. He had seen bad decisions. He had filed formal objections that went nowhere. He had accepted outcomes he disagreed with because the alternative, individually defecting from authority in a system that depended on collective compliance, was worse than the specific bad decision. He was making the other calculation now. She could see it in him. Not just today's calculation, whether to break the extraction order, whether to authorize her broadcast, whether to cover her position when she did it. The larger calculation. What it meant to have believed in a system for 30 years and to discover that the system had arranged your death. She didn't ask him about it. It wasn't the right time, and it might not ever be the right time. But she saw it. After the call with Webb, he'd sat for exactly 90 seconds by himself, facing east, not looking at anything in particular. Then he'd stood up, and everything that had been in his face for those 90 seconds had gone somewhere she couldn't see. And he'd turned to Martinez and started working the problem. That was who he was. Whatever it cost him, that was who he was. Beck thought about the name on the personnel list, the name Griff had recognized, the 22 years, the christenings, and Fallujah, and everything the list implied. She thought about how you functioned after something like that, whether you got to be angry, or whether the situation was too urgent for anger, or whether anger was just another resource you allocated when you had budget for it and held in reserve when you didn't. Later, she thought, account for it later. She went back to the laptop. The French officer's name was Lieutenant Colonel Armand Leclerc, and he drank terrible coffee from a thermos with the contentment of a man who had made peace with field conditions decades ago. He was 58, compact, with the particular economy of movement that Beck associated with people who had spent too many years in places where energy was a resource. He'd been embedded with a coalition advisory unit 40 kilometers north when the open frequency broadcast had come through. He turned his vehicle south within 10 minutes. "I have been waiting," he said, in English that carried the weight of something long considered, "for someone to say what you said on that frequency." They were in the partial shade of the French vehicle, a Griffon, armored, flying the blue identification flag that Martinez had spotted. Beck sat across from Leclerc on an equipment case. Griff stood to her left with his arms crossed, saying nothing, watching. "How long?" Beck asked. 8 months, since I arrived in this theater." Leclerc poured coffee into a second cup, offered it to Beck, who accepted it, and to Griff, who declined. "There is a pattern here that I have reported through my own chain of command 3 times. weapons material that should not be in certain hands, logistical routes that benefit certain contractors, engagements that seem designed, not to achieve military objectives, but to maintain conditions. You understand the distinction? Keep the conflict going, Beck said, stable enough for business, unstable enough to justify presence. Precisely. He looked at her steadily. Your broadcast named the operational order. Hollow Crown. I have seen that name in signals intelligence twice in the last 6 months, and was told both times it did not exist. It exists. I know that now. He set his cup down. What do you need? Beck looked at Griff. He gave her a small nod, her call. We need to be able to hold position for approximately 4 more hours, she said. We have a journalist who is verifying a documentation package and will publish within that window. We have a congressional staffer who has been briefed and is creating institutional pressure. What we don't have is physical security because the elements that were pursuing us pulled back but didn't stand down, and I expect them to recalculate their options once it becomes clear that the operation hasn't succeeded. Leclerc nodded slowly. They will try one more time, he said, before the window closes, before the publication becomes real. Yes, because after publication, the political cost of further action is too high. Before it, he spread his hands, you are still just a rogue unit in a desert. That's my assessment. He looked at her for a long moment. I have 6 personnel and 1 vehicle. I cannot provide air cover or heavy support. I'm not asking for that. What are you asking? Bear witness, Beck said. Be here, with your rank and your coalition status and your radio. Make it harder for anyone to claim we were never found, or that what happened to us was insurgent action. She paused. You being here changes the calculus. Leclerc picked up his coffee, drank it, set it down. In the French army, he said, there is a phrase, être là, be there. It is considered an obligation. He looked at Griff. You are Sergeant Major Griffin? Griff looked slightly surprised. Yeah. I have read your service record, not by coincidence. He stood, extending his hand. It is a pleasure to meet you. Now let us find better ground. They consolidated at 1650 on a low ridge that Leclerc's driver had identified from the topographic survey. 3 meters of elevation, enough to create a defensible position with clear sightlines in all directions. The French Griffin anchored the center. The 2 Humvees flanked it. It wasn't much. It was what they had. Griff organized the position with the efficiency of someone who had done this more times than he could count, and found that repetition did not make it easier, only faster. Fields of fire, communication arcs, casualty collection point, Leclerc's people integrated without instruction, slotting into the gaps the way experienced soldiers recognize gaps and filled them. Beck sat with her laptop in the lee of the lead Humvee and worked. The communications folder from the server was still encrypted. She'd been running a passive decryption attempt since the industrial building, feeding it processor cycles when she had them, and it had made progress. Not enough, but progress. At 17:04, she got her first readable file, a short email, 12 lines, between 2 addresses she didn't immediately recognize. She read it twice, wrote down the names, and opened the next file. By 17:30, she had 14 readable emails. The picture they assembled was not surprising. It confirmed what the financial records implied, but it was more specific, more personal, more legible as human behavior than wire transfers and account structures. People had written these emails casually, confidently, using names and details without apparent concern, because they had believed this server would never be read by anyone outside the network. That belief had been reasonable, until this morning. Paulson had managed to establish a stable satellite uplink. The interference that had been degrading their communications since 0800 had dropped away, which confirmed Beck's working theory that it had been actively maintained rather than incidental. and that its cessation was related to the broader decision to pull back. She used the uplink to send a supplementary package to her uncle and a second, more detailed package to Quan. At 17:48, her uncle called back. "There's a hearing being convened," he said. His voice had the particular tension of someone who had spent the last 3 hours in conversations he hadn't expected to have today. "Not publicly, not yet, but the committee chair has been briefed and I've never seen him move this fast." "Is it enough?" "The financial data is enough. The operational order." A pause. "Rebecca, who authorized that document?" "I don't know yet. The authorization chain in the document goes to a designation, not a name." "We'll find the name. That's what investigators are for." Another pause. "Are you safe?" She looked at the position. Leclerc's driver scanning east with binoculars. Martinez prone at the northern edge of the ridge. Griff walking the line, checking, adjusting. Delgado sitting against the Humvee's wheel with his arm in an improvised sling, using his good hand to help Paulson with the antenna positioning. Delgado, who had taken around because she'd broadcast their position. Who had not, when she tried to apologize, allowed her to finish the sentence. "We're all making choices today, Captain," he'd said. That was the right one. She hadn't known what to do with that. She still didn't. "Right now," she told her uncle. "Yes. Stay that way." He paused one more time, and she heard something in the pause that was personal rather than political. "Your father would, Uncle David." "Right, I know. Go." He hung up. Beck sat with the phone for a moment, then she put it away and went back to the laptop. At 18:12, the Reaper came. They heard it before they saw it, a distinctive turbine sound at high altitude, unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in theater. Leclerc's driver said something sharp in French and pointed northeast. Beck tracked the sound until she found it, a dark shape, high, moving on a course that would bring it directly overhead in approximately 4 minutes. Not a surveillance drone, a Reaper, armed. "Foxtrot Actual," Griff said quietly. "Or whoever is above Foxtrot Actual," Beck said. "They've decided." "How long before it's in range?" 3 minutes, maybe 4. Leclerc had already moved to his radio, speaking rapidly in French, calling his own change, she assumed, reporting the drone's presence, creating a record. His voice was calm and fast, the voice of a man who had prepared for exactly this contingency. Griff looked at his people. The position was what it was. They had cover from ground threats, but cover from a Reaper at altitude was a different calculation entirely. A Hellfire missile made the terrain irrelevant, and the drone's targeting system would find them regardless of concealment. "Options," he said. "If they fire," Beck said, "we are 8 personnel plus a French coalition element. Killing a French officer creates an international incident that is orders of magnitude larger than anything Hollow Crown was designed to contain. They might decide the incident is worth it. They might, but they're calculating right now, and every second they don't fire is a second where someone above Foxtrot Actual is deciding the math doesn't work. And if the math works," she looked at the drone, "then we have about 90 seconds. Griff looked at the position again. He was doing something Beck recognized as the particular mental process of a man who refused to accept that a situation had no move, who kept looking for the variable that hadn't been accounted for, the angle that hadn't been tried. He'd been doing it all day. She'd watched him find the move every time. "The Griffin," he said to Leclerc. Leclerc looked up from his radio. "Your vehicle, it's coalition marked, international identifier. If it's visible from the drone's camera and the drone's targeting system logs what it's looking at before it fires, the system records," Leclerc said. He understood immediately. "And a recording showing a coalition vehicle in the target zone before a strike changes what the strike looks like." Leclerc gave one sharp order. His driver moved the Griffin forward, out of the ridge's shadow, into open ground where it would be fully visible from above. Flying the blue flag, unmistakable. Beck was already on her own radio. She broadcast on the coalition command frequency, not the open emergency frequency she'd used before, but the dedicated command net that fed directly to the Joint Operations Center in Doha. She stated the drone's heading, altitude estimate, and a formal request for identification of the controlling authority. The drone kept coming. 2 minutes. Paulson had his antenna pointed straight up, broadcasting a continuous identification signal. Friendly Forces Marker, the electronic equivalent of a flag. Technically, a Reaper's targeting protocols were supposed to interrogate friendly force markers before engaging. Technically. 1 minute. The drone reached the overhead position. Beck watched it, directly above them now, the sound filling the air. She could see its silhouette against the late afternoon sky, the long wings, the slender fuselage, the hard points. She thought about the Hellfire. She thought about Okafor. She thought about the 47 seconds of broadcast and Delgado's arm and the accounting she was going to do later, when there was a later to do it in. She thought about Griff, standing 15 meters away, watching the same sky with his arms at his sides, not ducking, not moving, refusing to perform fear for a machine that couldn't read it anyway. 30 seconds. The drone banked, not toward them, away. A slow banking turn to the northwest, losing altitude as if settling into a new patrol pattern. The turbine sound changed pitch, grew quieter, receded. Nobody moved for a full 10 seconds. Then Wash let out a long breath that he'd apparently been holding since the drone appeared, and Martinez said something quiet that Beck didn't catch, and Leclerc put his radio down and picked up his terrible coffee and drank it with the equanimity of a man who had always assumed he would survive today and saw no reason to revise that assumption. Griff walked back to Beck. "Someone made the call," she said. "Someone with enough authority to override Foxtrot Actual. Or Foxtrot Actual made it themselves. The coalition marker, the command net broadcast, the identification record, it changed the math." "Almost." He looked at her steadily. "How do you feel?" She considered this question seriously, which was apparently the right response because he waited for the serious answer. "Like something that was very tightly held just let go," she said. "I don't know what to do with that yet." "You don't have to do anything with it right now." "No." She looked at the sky where the drone had been. "Is this over?" "The field part." He looked around the position, the personnel, the vehicles, the French coalition element that had witnessed everything. "The rest is just paperwork. Depositions, hearings." He paused. "Long, slow, ugly paperwork." "I know. Still want to have sent it?" She thought about the operational order, unit designation, expendable. She thought about Okafor, 21, Columbus. She thought about the name on the personnel list and what it had done to Griff's face for those 90 seconds when he sat alone facing east. "Yes," she said. "Still." He nodded. Once, the way he nodded when something was decided. "Good." The extraction came at 2034, 2 hours after dark, in the form of 3 U.S. Army vehicles, accompanied by a military police element and a JAG officer who arrived with a recording device and an expression of someone who had been briefed on a very complicated situation and was determined to document every second of it. The JAG officer's name was Captain Priya Anand. She was 31, from Atlanta, and she shook Beck's hand and said, "I've read everything you sent. I have questions." "I have answers," Beck said. "Good. We're going to be here a while." They were. Beck sat with Anand for 2 hours in the back of one of the MP vehicles, going through the documentation package piece by piece, establishing provenance, establishing chain of custody for the electronic files, establishing the timeline of events from 0614 to the drone's withdrawal. Anand was methodical and fast and asked exactly the right questions, and Beck began to understand that Anand had been deployed to this specifically, that someone in Washington had made a call, and the response had been precise enough to send the right person. Her uncle's work? Or the committee's? Or both? Griff sat outside during this process. Beck could see him through the vehicle's small window, sitting on a supply case, talking to Leclerc, who had insisted on remaining until the extraction was complete, apparently out of the same sense of obligation that had brought him south in the first place. They talked for a long time. She couldn't hear it. She didn't need to. At 2,220, Anand clicked off her recorder and said, "On the record, do you believe your actions today were consistent with your oath of service?" Beck thought about it, not because she was uncertain of the answer, but because the question deserved genuine consideration rather than reflex. "I refused an unlawful order," she said. "I disclosed classified information through a channel that I assessed as necessary given the failure of proper reporting mechanisms. I prioritized the lives of non-combatants over institutional compliance." She paused. "I believe those actions were consistent with what the oath actually means, as opposed to what it can be made to mean when the institution is being used to protect specific interests." Anand looked at her for a long moment. Then she clicked the recorder back on. "Can you repeat that for the record?" Beck repeated it. 3 days later, Griff requested retirement. He did it through proper channels, with proper paperwork, because that was how Griff did everything. Inside the system, by the rules, even when the system had just tried to kill him. Beck found out from Martinez, who told her with the careful neutrality of someone who had feelings about it and was choosing not to display them in front of a superior officer. She went to find him at the FOB, which was a very different FOB than the one she'd left 4 days ago. Quieter, weighted with the awareness of something that had happened and couldn't be unhappened. The way a unit felt after an investigation that implicated people they had trusted. Griff was in the motor pool, for no particular reason she could identify, except that people who didn't know where to be often ended up somewhere practical. "Martinez told me," she said. "I figured he would." He was looking at the Humvee, the specific vehicle she'd been in during the entire operation. Not doing anything to it, just looking. 30 years is enough. Is it? It was enough before yesterday. Yesterday just made it clearer. She stood beside him. The motor pool smelled like diesel and metal, which was, she realized, the same smell as the industrial building in Sector 7, and she thought about the false partition and the server rack and the 14 months of transactions and the moment she'd read the word expendable and understood exactly what it meant. "The name on the list," she said. "Yeah, he's been contacted by investigators." Griff was quiet for a moment. "I know, Anand told me." He looked at his hands. "You want to know if I'm all right? I want to know if you're going to be." He considered this distinction, which was a real distinction, and gave it the consideration it deserved. Eventually, he said, "Yeah, I think so." He paused. 22 years is a long time to know someone. Turns out it's not long enough to know everything about them. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You did the right thing. He did the wrong one. Those are just the facts." He turned to look at her. "What happens to you now?" "Investigation, form deposition, possibly a hearing, depending on how the committee decides to proceed. Professionally," she paused, "I don't know. I don't think they can prosecute me for what I did. I think they might try to manage me into a position where nothing I know is actionable. Desk job in the basement. Something like that." He looked at her steadily. "You could get out." "I could. Would you?" She thought about it. The honest answer was that she didn't know yet. The honest answer was that she was still in the middle of the accounting, still sitting with the costs and trying to understand what they meant and whether what she'd spent them on was worth the price. Okafor was in that accounting. Delgado's arm. The 47 seconds. Griff's face when he saw the name. "Ask me in 6 months," she said. He almost smiled. It was a very small almost. "Fair." They stood in the motor pool for a while, not talking. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that two people who have been through something can sit in without needing to fill it, because the something is present enough already. "Beck," he said finally. "Yeah, for what it's worth," he looked at the Humvee, at the fob, at the desert beyond the wire. "You didn't act like a quantote." She recognized the word from the outline of this thing she was still inside of. The word that meant chess piece, pawn, the piece that gets placed and used and doesn't get to choose its square. She looked at him. "Neither did you," she said. He picked up a wrench from the tool rack, turned it over in his hands, set it back. "Go get some sleep, Captain. You've got depositions in the morning." "You too, Sergeant Major." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. She left him in the motor pool. The article published at 03:17 Eastern Standard Time, 11 days after Sector 7. Beck was awake when it happened, not because she'd been waiting, exactly, but because she'd been sleeping badly in the particular way that people sleep badly when something unresolved is sitting in the background of their consciousness. She saw the notification on her phone, opened it, read the headline. Classified documents revealed defense contractors authorized Syrian intelligence operation using U.S. troops as cover. Congressional inquiry announced. Kwan's byline. The paper's national security correspondent had co-signed. A note at the bottom. Documentation independently verified by 3 former intelligence officials. Beck read the article. It was good, precise, restrained, more restrained than the documents warranted, but that was the right call for publication because restraint was credibility, and credibility was the only thing that made this matter rather than disappear into the news cycle. Kwan had understood that. She'd built the article the way Beck had built the package. Financial records first, because money was concrete. Operational order second, because the language was damning. Timeline third, because timelines were hard to dispute. The contractor was named. The energy company was named. The authorization chain was described, though not all the names in it were public yet. Some were still under investigation. Some were protected by the ongoing JAG process. The unit was named FOB Kestrel, Captain Rebecca Hayes, Master Sergeant Daniel Griffin. Okafor was named Danny Okafor, 21, Columbus, Ohio. His parents had been reached for comment. His mother had said, "He wanted to serve. He believed in it. Someone needs to be accountable for that." Beck read that sentence 3 times. Someone needs to be accountable for that. She put the phone down. She lay in the dark for a while, in the particular silence of a FOB at 0300, and she did the accounting. She went through it the way Griff had told her to, not rushing, not softening, not assigning different weights to the costs than they actually carried. Okafor, Delgado's arm, the 47 seconds, the name on the list and what it had done to a man she respected. Webb's voice going small on the radio, the drone banking away, Leclerc's coffee, Anand's recorder clicking on. "Can you repeat that for the record?" She repeated it in her head. "I prioritize the lives of non-combatants over institutional compliance. I believe those actions were consistent with what the oath actually means." She believed it. She still believed it in the dark at 0300 with the accounting laid out in full. That didn't make the costs smaller. It made them what they were. At 0400 she got up, made coffee, sat at her workstation, and opened a new document on her laptop. At the top she typed, "Formal request for full declassification of Operation Hollow Crown." She started writing. 6 weeks later, Beck sat in a wood-paneled hearing room in the Dirksen Senate Office Building in Washington. She had testified for 4 hours the day before. She would testify again tomorrow. The committee had subpoenaed the defense contractor, the energy company, and 14 individuals across the authorization chain. 3 had already retained counsel. 2 had declined to appear. One had appeared and invoked the Fifth Amendment 11 times in 40 minutes, which was itself a kind of testimony. The room was full. Congressional staff, lawyers, observers, two network cameras that had been granted pool access. Beck sat at the witness table in her uniform, which she had decided to wear for every session, not as a statement exactly, but as a fact. She was in the uniform. She had been in the uniform in Sector 7. The uniform was what she'd been wearing when someone wrote the word expendable about her. She sat in the uniform and she answered the questions. Between sessions, she walked the marble corridors. Her uncle found her on the second day in a corridor near the east stairs and stood with her for a moment without speaking, the way he had when she was small and something had been difficult. "How are you holding up?" he said. "Fine. Rebecca." She looked at him. He was 61, silver-haired, 23 years in Senate staff work, and he had the particular tiredness of someone who had spent 3 weeks moving very fast on a very complicated problem and was now in the part where the problem was visible to everyone, and the moving had to slow down. "I'm holding up," she said, more carefully. "Some days better than others." He nodded. "Griff's retirement was approved." "I know. He testified yesterday, morning session, while you were being prepped. I was in the room." He paused. He was something, Beck. Every word precise, nothing wasted. The committee chairman asked him if he had any final statement, and he said, her uncle paused again, as if checking the memory. "I served this country for 30 years. I would like to believe that what I did in Syria was consistent with that service. I believe it was. I have no further statement." Beck looked at the marble floor. "Yeah," she said quietly, "that sounds right. The contractor's shares dropped 22% this morning. I saw. The energy company has withdrawn its Syria concessions. I saw that too." He looked at her. "Nobody's been charged yet." "I know. They might not be. These things—" He stopped, chose the honest version. "These things don't always end with accountability. They end with investigation and inquiry, and sometimes the record is enough. Sometimes the record is all you get." Beck thought about Okafor's mother. Someone needs to be accountable for that. She thought about the record and what the record meant, and whether the record was enough. "I know," she said again. She went back to the hearing room. She sat at the witness table. The lights came on, the cameras came on, the gavel came down, and she answered the next question, and the next, and the next. The last night, she flew back to the FOB for exactly 48 hours before her reassignment orders came through. A posting in Virginia, DIA, the kind of posting that was neither reward nor punishment, but that placed her very specifically inside a structure where her knowledge was an asset rather than a threat. She hadn't decided yet whether that was a good thing. She walked the perimeter at 0530 as she had every morning for 14 months. The desert looked the same. The heat was the same. The smell of scorched rock and diesel, and the things she'd never been able to name, was the same. She stopped at the eastern perimeter and looked out towards Sector 7. She couldn't see the industrial structures from here. They were too far. But she knew they were there, stripped of their server rack now, stripped of the false partition in the generator and 14 months of transactions. The JAG teams had gone through the building 2 days after the extraction, documented everything, collected everything. The building itself was still standing, empty now, genuinely empty. She thought about what she'd said in the Dirksen corridor. Some days better than others. That was true. The accounting she'd done at 0300 the night the article published was not a single accounting. It was the first of many. She understood that now. You didn't do it once and close the file. You kept the file open. You revisited it as more information came in, as the costs became clearer, as the consequences extended further than you'd initially seen. That was the honest version of carrying something. She pulled out her notebook. Peter, pen, 14 months of observations in the same handwriting. She found the page from the morning before Sector 7. Grid Delta, Extraction East. Why East? Who benefits from East? She turned to a new page. She wrote, "The record is not nothing." She looked at it for a moment, then she wrote, "Neither is the cost." She put the notebook away. The sun came up. The heat got worse. Somewhere in Virginia, a desk was waiting. She went back inside. 11 months after Sector 7, Beck was sitting in her DIA office in Virginia when the news alert came through on her secondary screen. Congressional committee finds insufficient evidence for criminal referral in Syria contractor case. Investigation closed. She read it twice. She read the sub-headline, "3 contractors face civil penalties. Defense Department to review intelligence oversight protocols." She sat with it for a long time. Civil penalties, protocol reviews. The energy company had already re-entered negotiations for the Syria concessions under a restructured entity. The contractor had received a reduced budget allocation, not canceled, reduced. The authorization chain had been formally documented, formally filed, formally placed in the record. Nobody was going to prison. She thought about Okafor's mother. She thought about 30 years of Griff's service in the name on a personnel list. She thought about Delgado's arm and Leclerc's terrible coffee and the 47 seconds on open frequency and the drone banking away over a Syrian ridge. She thought about what her uncle had said in the Dirksen corridor. Sometimes the record is all you get. She looked at the news alert for a long time. Then she opened a new document and started writing the next request. It was what she had. It was not nothing. On her phone, a message from Griff. 2 words, no punctuation. "Keep going." She typed back, "Always." She went back to work. Outside her window, Washington was having a typical morning. Traffic on Constitution Avenue. Early tourists at the monuments. A government that contained, as it always had, people who believed in it and people who used it, and people who were trying, imperfectly and at cost, to tell the difference. They called it policy. She called it blood. And she kept going anyway. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in her bunk in the FOB's officer quarters. A plywood partition, a cot, a folding table with her laptop, and she stared at the ceiling and did what she'd been doing since Sector 7, which was try to hold the full picture without flinching from any part of it. The picture was large. Larger than it had seemed at 0614 when the IED detonated and the world became fire. The financial network she'd pulled from the server ran through 7 countries and implicated 4 corporations and had been operating for at minimum 14 months, which meant it predated her assignment to FOB Kestrel, which meant that her assignment to FOB Kestrel had been, at some level, anticipated, that the intelligence cell she'd been sent to run had been known to the network as a variable to be managed, and that management had been built into the operational planning. She was not the first person who had looked at this. She might not be the last. That thought was both steadying and terrible. Steadying because it meant the pattern was visible enough to be found again. Terrible because it meant this had been visible before, and someone had looked, and the looking hadn't been enough. She thought about her thesis. The structural failures are the ones that happen not because people are evil, but because the system is designed to reward confidence over accuracy. She'd written that in a comfortable seminar room at the University of Virginia, and her thesis advisor had given her an A, and she'd thought she understood it. She understood it differently now. The system had not been designed to fail. It had been designed to succeed, and in most cases it did succeed, and the people who served in it mostly served in good faith, and the webs of the world implemented orders without reviewing tactical assessments, not because they were corrupt, but because the volume of orders was high and the expectation of institutional integrity was reasonable, and you could not function if you interrogated every decision at every level. The vulnerability was not the people. The vulnerability was the assumption that the institution was clean, and the patience of people who were willing to exploit that assumption over years and across multiple layers. She'd found one instance of it, documented it, sent it up. She had no idea how many other instances she hadn't found. She stared at the ceiling and thought about that until 0317, when her phone showed a notification and she reached for it, and the headline was there, and she read it, and it was real. Then she made coffee and opened a new document. It was a start, not an ending, not a resolution, not justice in the form that Okafor's mother deserved. A start. She had learned 14 months ago, and more clearly 11 days ago, that in this specific territory, intelligence, institutional corruption, the long, difficult work of accountability, starts were what you got, and what you did with them was choose to keep going or choose to stop. She wasn't going to stop. The coffee was bad. She drank it anyway. The document waited. She started writing. She looked at those two words on her phone screen for a long time. Keep going. She thought about what those words cost him to send. Not the sending itself. Griff was not a man who found communication difficult when the communication was necessary. The cost was in the context. A man who had served 30 years and retired with the knowledge that someone he'd pulled out of rubble in Fallujah had helped arrange his death, sending two words to the person whose decision to act had put that knowledge in front of the world. Keep going from that man, in that context, meant something specific. It meant what you did had value. It meant the costs were real, and the value was real, and the value was worth the cost. It meant, I am not broken by this. It meant, neither are you. She thought about Griff's face in the 90 seconds when he sat alone facing east, after she'd shown him the name. The way everything in his face had gone somewhere she couldn't see, and then the door had closed, and he'd stood up and started working the problem. She thought about him in the Dirksen hearing room. I have no further statement. She thought about him in the motor pool, not doing anything, just standing with a wrench he didn't need. She thought about a word he'd used, untold, chess piece, the thing he'd said she hadn't acted like. She wondered if he knew she'd thought the same thing about him. Every decision he'd made since the moment he'd read those 3 lines in the classified file, every decision had been his own. He'd chosen to cover her broadcast. He'd chosen to position the Griffin. He'd chosen to testify. He'd chosen to retire through proper channels. He hadn't acted like a chess piece either. He'd acted like a person who understood the game and refused to be played. That was what 30 years had given him in the end. Not certainty, not immunity, just the knowledge of when to trust the system and when to trust himself, and the willingness to live with the difference. She typed back, always. Then she went back to work.